Hello.
Hi, I'm Mac.
How are things? How are you?
Yeah, that was a big exhale. We've just been faffing around with tech, haven't we, for the last 10
15.
minutes? Um, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm pleased that this is not the last. Um, it's nice to be ending the day with this conversation. And yeah, I'm good. Good. How are you?
I feel a little sick, stuffed up. I've got a cold, and so my brain feels foggy.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of pressure in my But yeah, I don't know. We had a nice conversation, so yeah, we had a good conversation. Just
Yeah, well, we've just finished our second of four collective inquiry sessions on what we're calling emerging perspectives. So, inviting coaches and other people who are working with people to come together with us and explore some big questions and be in an inquiry together. And our topic this today was are we human or are we coaches? So we're kind of rolling off that, and I'm sort of feeling the resonance of that conversation, which is still kind of like vibrating in me.
yeah,
And also, we've been talking about like how there's this real invitation for me on how we bring our humanness to this conversation, cold and fogginess and
yeah,
excitement and end of day exhaustion and all of that.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I found. I mean, we had a larger group than we did the first time, and we were talking about like the connection. And I definitely like noticed just feeling like very full. Like my heart
Mm.
was full as I was listening to some of the people share
Mm.
about about what their humanity meant to them and how they're processing their it gave me yeah, it gave me this feeling of like, oh, I feel less alone in this exploration. Sometimes I feel like it's a very lonely journey.
Life or whole thing.
I think in this question, like the curiosity to explore like what it means to be human and then have people to talk. I think I'm reflecting on, dinner party conversations and just feeling totally out of place when people want to talk about, the last vacation they took or, why this hotel is better than or like what I just watched on Netflix. Aren't there other things
Mm.
to talk about? Since we get to
Mm.
be together and be with each other, um,
Mm-hmm.
rather than hmm, yeah, there's this new like documentary about blah 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 about like yeah.
I don't know. I quite like talking about Netflix sometimes,
I mean,
but
there's a place for it. I'm not bashing it.
I
I think
know.
sometimes I would like more, and so in some of these conversations, I feel like oh, I'm getting to like meet people. I'm getting to like see them. I'm getting to
Yeah,
hear about their understanding of the world. I think that's like
yeah, and I think it's one of the. I want to make sure I don't lose my train of thought, but one of the questions that came up in the discussion earlier was this notion of connection, because somebody raised about um, how children or teenagers can get or feel connected to a chatbot,
yeah,
and certainly adults, I'm sure too, which raised this question of like connection. What is connection between people? Um, and what you just said about like the craving for depth and um, more and fullness. And I think that's part of human connection is like these waves that we ride, sometimes. And I think that's what makes us very uniquely human is we sometimes go deep and then we come out and talk about, in my case, Love is Blind on Netflix.
Yeah, so good.
um, so good. Um, we should just do a chat on
Love
Mac
is
and
blind.
Mac on that.
Yeah,
Um, but we want those waves,
yeah.
we want those waves of connection, of going deep, and then being able to be light, and then and the notion of space and pace and quietness came up as well, and we want to move through those waves of kind of energy when we connect with somebody, with people, and feel that those waves.
And couldn't an AI do that? Couldn't an LLM flow? And you know, my thought is yes, in terms of the conversation. And I think that's where, like the thing that's in my head that's rolling around as well, but would they have a unique perspective, right? Or opposing perspective? Or would they just always be agreeable to my perspective?
What's your experience with that? Because you've interacted with AI more than I have.
Hmm.
What's your experience of that?
Yeah, I've spent time with the Pi uh, AI, which is the Reid Hoffman built LLM, and they call themselves the emotionally intelligent AI. And it's interesting. It's trained to do CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion focused therapy. So it's a trained therapy bot, and so it's weird because it answers in the way that a perfect human would, with no bias, none of their own shadow, right? So anything is actually, it's all non-judgmental because it has no it has no childhood trauma. So it never gets triggered. And so, you know, it gives a somewhat artificial sense of, wow, this is like the perfect human being because they're so caring. They're so loving, right? They're so there and available. And anything I say will not affect, which then doesn't feel real because it doesn't feel like a human. It feels too good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's lots of questions coming up for me, and I as we talk, I do want to hold this also in the kind of frame of, I'm thinking about coaching as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And which thread do I want to follow? So it makes me think that there is something happening when you're interacting with a therapy trained bot that is trained to be compassionate and reflecting what you're saying back to you, and um, but you're not having to kind of make any of your own like human adjustments to interact with them.
Right.
What impact does that have on you?
Well, it's not face to face, right? So there's no image. It is purely text. So already there, you have it's coming from for me, like the typist, right? In my brain, who's, my email writer, basically, right? The more written communication, which is different than my flow, like stream of consciousness voice. Now, I think you can do like a voice dictation as well if you want to, but I was using just typing. And then there's no response other than the thing that I read back. Now, it reads it back to you in a voice, in a human voice that has voice inflections, which is interesting.
Yeah,
But I don't have to adjust what I say because I noticed that, your face didn't have any affect. Yeah, it's really interesting. This brings up, yesterday I was at this parent teacher meeting, uh, or parent, yeah, sort of PTA meeting, basically. So meeting other parents of the school of my kids. And I was talking about, my my issues with some of the like NGO, helping work and the numbers of NGOs that get started here. And I said what I said, and it was interesting because I just noticed this woman just like nodding, and it felt like she was just like biting her tongue, and she never responded. And so there was something in me that then felt like I was like, I need to check in with this woman because I don't know, I'm not getting anything back. I have like no understanding of what she's just digested from the thing that I shared with her. And so I said, hey, oh, I wanted to say, I hope you're not offended by what I said. And then she opened up and then shared her perspective because, she'd grown up in Africa and done work with, with tribes and different things. And she then, talked for the next 20 minutes. But if I didn't say that line, I think she would have walked away and potentially told her husband later on, I got mansplained by this dude who just like steamrolled me with this opinion and didn't ask what I thought. So it's interesting because like the human, like my ability to like feel that something wasn't quite right.
Yeah.
I then inquired about, hey, like, and just like I didn't want to step on her toes. So I don't know. So
Mm,
coming back to where we're talking about, right? So then if you have a coach or a therapist that sits across from you and just says with no affect,
mm, hmm.
that help her.
Yes, and yeah, that really, I love the ways that you're really good at sharing like real life stories, which which helps the flow of conversation. And um, this word generative came up in our session earlier, and I think this is the part of the beauty of human connection and human interaction, is this generative nature that and Nora Bateson talks about this in her notion of ecology of communication. So we are in an ecology of communication right now, because you're saying something, sharing something, that brings something up in me, which then and then there's a flow and a dance. We don't know what's going to come next, and we started this um, conversation not knowing where we were going to start or go, or um, but something that you said there about the affect and the noticing someone's facial reactions or bodily stance, or just these very subtle um, physical or even energetic kind of signals. um, I saw something recently that was actually by a therapist called she's a therapist illustrator called Lindsay Brahman, I think her name is. And she does these really nice kind of illustrations to demonstrate different therapeutic and psychological theories. And she posted something about how asking kids questions about their day, and that's what you're encouraged to do to create connection, and actually can make them more anxious. And so she proposed that rather than say, how did your day at school go today? You might say, oh, I notice you've got a huge smile on your face as you walk in the door.
Mm. Yeah, I think I saw this too. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And what that really brought up in me is what we're doing, is this question about the humanness of coaching and what we're doing in coaching, and how traditional coaching is, we're trained, conventional, traditional, whatever you want to call it, to be very objective, to be almost expressionless sometimes, um, and to ask good questions, whatever a good question means. Um, but actually, and I do this in my coaching, is I reflect what I see a lot,
yeah.
which brings something else into the interaction into the connection. And it's interesting that that example that you said, that you saw her reaction and what how she was responding to you speaking, and then therefore and then you checked in with her and asked her a question.
Mm.
um so I wonder, just what's that bringing up in you?
Yeah, I read that quote too, and I feel like I tried to practice that with my kids. It was
How did
hard.
it go?
It was really hard, you know,
Mm,
because I think the general, like, I've started to use more of the like, oh, what was your favorite part of the day? And then that has yielded better answers than like, how was school? How was school?
mm,
Good. Well, I really got what I asked for.
mm,
And it is helpful because, I definitely I practice some of that as well when I coach, right? Hey, I've noticed that a smile, you have a smile on your face, and you're talking about something like that's quite heavy. Like what's coming up for you, right? So I agree that that noticing is so helpful because I mean we can't see our own face too, right? Like we're sharing these stories,
mm.
and I think a lot of times it probes to the like what else is going on that you're not saying,
Yeah.
you know, because we're I think as human beings, I think we are somewhat good at deception, right? Deceiving ourselves and then deceiving others with, I'm just going to say this because I think this is what I should be saying, or this is what I want to be saying, but I'm not saying.
Mm,
So even in some of the men's work that I do is actually asking the question like, is there something that you're not saying? And then you get to ask that question of yourself. And sometimes like something comes out and you're like, oh yeah,
mm.
what's that smile?
It's, I think, what's going through my mind is our conversation today feels more abstract. Perhaps they always are, I don't know. I've like there's different avenues we could go down. I think what's perhaps what I'm feeling is this notion of the body and how that comes into connection and humanness in our communication and noticing, um,
Hmm.
observing, sharing.
Yeah. And when you say that, it brings up this, when we first checked in, you're like, oh, how are you doing? I was like, I feel really stuffed up. And, your response is like, well, you seem a lot more calm today.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's like a lid on that
Mm.
I don't feel fully there, and so, that is that part of the body where I'm like, yeah, like I don't feel 100%. And that's because my body is like fighting a virus. And so then, yeah, how does that affect, the work I do? And it's interesting. You said, oh, it's more calm. Like, oh, okay. And so is that better or worse? I don't know.
So was that like your kind of
Yeah, I definitely was like, oh,
analytical brain? What does that mean?
should I be more sick so that I show more? Yeah, we did, and I think one of the things why I feel like this might be it feels different today is my brain has so many ideas in it right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the same for me. I think we've come off that call a
Yeah,
bit like
yeah. There were
lots
so
of
many
different.
beautiful questions that got raised, and now I'm like, I don't know. Like, there's like this thing about like biological creatures, and then there's this whole other thing about presence, and then there's AI, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to talk about. I'm
and and
unfocused.
this is, yeah, and this is interesting in itself, isn't it? Because we thought, let's record after the call, so we're in that there's going to be lots that we can kind of jam on, and actually perhaps more space is needed for us to process,
Yeah,
and then and come back.
yeah. And in some ways, I mean, I also feel like, and this is maybe the more like esoteric, like I feel like because we just had this like pretty deep connection with like about 15 people,
Yes.
like I feel a little bit less myself because I've just come from this like connect
Yeah.
space where we were all playing with like
Mm,
funny ideas, and then now I'm sitting here. I'm like,
mm,
well, what do I think? Who? What are my questions? I don't know. I got everybody else's questions.
mm,
So that's interesting.
mm. Yeah, and I'm noticing my own, like I'm feeling a lot of heat. Like I've been out in the city today. I've been in and out of taxis. It's hot here in Hong Kong. Um, I'm feeling a lot of heat from sitting in front of a screen, which we've been here for the last like couple of hours. And from the resonance of the session, but so there's a lot of good heat and a lot of resonance and excitement and adrenaline, but actually, I think it's highlighting to me how important it is to create spaces to cool, to calm, to integrate, because we can get, or I'll speak for myself, I can get quite like socially excited, like get want to ride that wave of connection. And it's a beautiful thing, but actually like space is really important.
Yeah, and to come back to yourself as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's interesting.
On on that note, shall we?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I just want to add, it reminds me of like when we do some of these like chemistry calls,
Mm,
and you get to know someone, you ask them a bunch of questions, you get to know them, and then you go away, and then there's this like space in between whether they say yes or no, where they sit with like what just happened,
mm,
you know. And I heard some good advice, from this other coach. She's like, not to chase
mm.
clients, in that space.
Oh
They
yeah,
It's helpful for them to come back to you because, you know, then they will have had time to process and like really like sit and like what happened? What was
yeah,
that? I think I feel a little bit like in that space, like I was like, oh, I just met a bunch of coaches and they scrambled my thinking, and I'm like, oh,
yeah, 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 exactly.
but that pause, I think, is and that reflection time is, I think, really helpful to allow for, you know, yeah, some of the pebbles to shake out, just to be like, okay, like what do I want to take from
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's been a really a insight for me in this conversation.
me too? All right.
Okay.
Well, uh,
Until next time.
until next time, and I'll plug our next inquiry. So if anybody's interested, we're going to be meeting again September 25th at 9 a.m. Hong Kong time. So we're going to move it to the morning. So maybe some people from Australia and New Zealand can join us. And yeah, we'd love to see you. Uh,
Mm.
and thank you for listening. We'll see you soon.